Welcome, you're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. Ukraine is facing a difficult period in which challenges to press freedom crop up regularly. The war in eastern Ukraine with its hybrid threats only heightens the stakes, making it more important than ever that citizens have access to quality reporting and reporters remain safe and uncensored. To discuss the challenges journalists face now and ways to promote freedom of the media in Ukraine, we welcome to our studio today Artem Bidenko. He is the State Secretary of the Ministry of Information Policy. So hello and thank you for joining us.
Hello.
At first, let's take a few moments and discuss the current state of the freedom of the media in Ukraine now.
Well, we had the Freedom House report several days ago, and it again showed Ukraine as partly free territory, partly free region, and it showed some things to get worse than they were last year.
Like what? Like which industries, which fields of journalism actually
We're talking
worsened?
about media freedom. So it was connected to the situation with journalists' attacks of accusations towards mass media and so on and so forth. But this worsening was not very high. It was like 1 point lower. And some days ago, we had a conference with Freedom House director. So he said that altogether situation is good for Ukraine. It's much better than it was like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. But of course, there's a lot of much to do more. And what they see main problems for Ukraine are the monopolization of media by several oligarch groups and the necessity for self-regulation, because a lot of problematic situations are connected with absence of strong self-regulating bodies in Ukraine.
When we're talking about self-regulation, it cannot be pure. It cannot be to the way that it is totally complete. There is always government involved. And when those two things, meaning government regulations and self-regulations, when those two mix up, doesn't it cause mistrust?
No, that's called co-regulation.
Okay.
And that's a very important thing, which also was told by the director of Freedom House, that co-regulation is the next step for Ukraine, for example, because when we take state regulation, which could be very harmful for media, when we take self-regulation, which could be like self-censorship for journalists or editors or owners of media, then we should talk about co-regulation when interests of state, of security, of nation itself, and interests of freedom of speech, of media, can be in cooperation, united, and create some field for communication, for creating good media atmosphere, and struggle against fake news, for example.
Speaking of fake news, how do we teach Ukrainian population to recognize fake news, to analyze and to pick them out of the whole flow of the information that surrounds people right now?
Well, that's all about education, mostly.
How do we
so
do
we
it?
have to educate people. And in the new standard of education of school, Ukrainian school, we have already media literacy in this standard. And there are lecturers, there are tutors who begin lecturing this to pupils, to students. So all we have to wait until there is a strong field, a lot of people who can teach media literacy, and in years people will know how to see which is fake news, who is fake expert, and how to take information from different sources.
According to 2019 World Press Freedom Index that was compiled by the international organization Reporters Without Borders, Ukraine is ranked 102nd in the list, whereas Norway is the leader of the list. So what is so special about regulations in the media sphere in Norway, and what kind of experience could Ukraine take up if we didn't yet?
The main problem of Ukraine today is murderers of journalists, which are not in the court and
which are not addressed to the court.
Yes, this is the main problem, which differs from Norway. And the problem of monopolization of media. So we have to start demonopolization of media. We have to start all these processes that have been in Europe in 60s, 70s. Where
in order to start all of these processes, I mean, demonopolization of media, what should we start with?
It's legislation mostly.
Okay.
So it's about the law on information, law on mass media, which have to state what kinds of information, what kinds of owners, how they show them, how media show their owners, and how owners find investing for media, for example. Because despite some good things in laws for the recent 2-3 years, we still have very closed information about several media.
Okay, in your personal opinion, should there be an issue or a note in the law that could punish people for attacking or showing aggression or even murdering journalists? Because as far as I know,
we have these articles now in criminal
code. Okay, but they're not followed. If there are no cases in the court.
That's not a problem of criminal code. That's a problem of criminal processing code. About finding murderers, finding those people who prohibit journalists from doing their work, finding and putting them to jail. That's the problem.
How many journalists in Ukraine have been killed on the job since, let's say, 2018?
Well, I don't know the exact number, but we have a platform on the European Union basis. It's an online platform where all cases are published for different countries. And Ukraine has 47 cases, including murderers. 7 cases are already closed, so we gave all information needed, and these cases were closed. 39 cases are now open and waiting for resolving. Among them, there are also murderers of journalists, but not like 3 or 4 of them.
Okay, well, socialists say that usually it takes 2 generations of the population in order to change the mind of the society. So let's say we do manage to rebuild the whole media sphere, take out the monopolization on the legislative level, prevent attacks and murders of the journalists. 2 generations later, what kind of a media sphere would Ukraine end up with?
There is no simple recipe for this. There is no such a simple decision like let 2 generations go and everything will be okay. Media sphere.
Well, we need to be educating the generations that are coming, of course.
It doesn't matter. Media sphere, as any other social sphere, is very complex and need complex decisions. And if we watch to the European or United States situation, we see that in different countries, there are also murders of journalists. There are also attempts of politicians to control media. Let's take the United States. We have very complex situation now with fake news, with fake experts, fake organizations, despite their freedom of speech, despite their basic laws, and so on and so forth. That's about values. That's about values of generations and economic and social situation in country. The worse economic and social situation becomes, the worse situation with freedom of speech. The more country and government are responsible for social and liberal values and rights of people, not only freedom of speech, the more liberal is society towards freedom of speech and liberal towards journalists and their rights. So it's about complex decisions, not just education and generations. We can wait until 2 generations come and leave us, and the 3rd generation will decide that total control is a must, for example. That's not a decision. It's a very long way of doing different things towards liberal values.
Okay, and how is Ukraine doing so far with the freedom of speech?
Well, it depends from leaders, from politicians, from political parties. And we see now that all political parties are promoting freedom of speech and helping freedom of speech to promote in Ukraine and throughout the world. So that gives me, for example, a hope that everything will be okay with freedom of speech. What we need to make our judicial system more effective and more fast to find and punish people who prevent journalists from doing their work.
If we look at the whole international map and all of the countries that exist in the world, whose country, like whose media sphere is the most precise, let's say, is the most protected and is the most fair? And who should Ukraine look up to? Which country should Ukraine look up to?
We look alike as Italy and France, not only in media situation, but in many situations. What are the examples to go forward? That's Scandinavian countries, of course, Norway, Finland. But the mentality is very different. So we want to be more free, to be more tolerant, but still there are a lot of people living in Ukraine who think that tolerance is just a word which means nothing for them.
Unfortunately, let's hope that it's going to change in the near future.
That's why we have to make more education about that.
Okay, let's hope that Ukrainian population is going to get educated. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
That was Artem Bidenko. He's the State Secretary of the Ministry of Information Policy. Thank you so much for watching UATV. Stay tuned for more.